Hey folks, it's Ben. We're doing a wheel bearing on a 2008 Chevy Uplander. We've got a lot of play in this front wheel here and it's related directly to the bearing. You can test them real easy. If it's shaky this way, it's sometimes a steering component, but if it's also shaky up and down, very often we're talking at a bearing here. It's nighttime. I'm not really doing it right now, but what I'm going to do is pre-soak. And what am I pre-soaking with penetrating oil so that it'll come apart easier? We got our nut right here on our axle. So we're going to have to loosen that. So we're going to spray this with penetrating oil. And then on the back we've got a few bolts to look at. We've got, I believe this one here, don't quote me on that. I'm going to grease everything that's got a hex head on it. That's going to hold our brake caliper off because we're going to have to peel this back to get the disc off, expose the bearing. And then of course we have 3 on the back of the bearing here. So if I poke my head in here, there's one directly. Here's the drive axle. There's one directly here. There's another one on that side. Another one on that side. So we're just going to soak everything in a penetrating oil. I'm going to be using Seafoam Deep Creep. And then we'll come back tomorrow and we'll start railing on this thing to get it torn apart. Getting the bearing off, you're going to need a 34 millimeter deep socket. And we're going to be taking the nut off the drive axle. I find it's pretty easy to do with the brake assembly still on. You need a shaft to keep the axle from turning. It is technically connected through the transmission, and you could also have somebody step on the brake and hold it still for you, but I just find using a stick. We're going to be replacing the studs with the new bearing anyway, and I've had everything obviously since the first part of the video soaking in oil, and then you just come down and you crank on this thing. I use a breaker bar on my ratchet. A breaker bar straight up with not on a ratchet would be cool, but yeah, I've already kind of broken it free, and so it's just a matter of bringing it out, and now I'm going to remove that nut before removing the brake. Not that easy. Now, these are 15 mil and they are nasty. I'm using a breaker bar in my big sockets to get these brake bolts out to get the caliper. We'll just hang it off the strut here when we're done. See if I can break this top one. Not with this socket. There's a bolt right here on the strut. I gotta get an extension and or a deep socket. It's kind of dark in here. We'll give you the idea. Here's the top one, not this bolt here. That holds the caliper on the on each side of the disc. There's one on top which is easy to get to because you got lots of leverage. Feel free to use breaker bars. And then this one I had to use a breaker bar on, and then I'm just using a smaller ratchet. But this is the bolt here that tends to get in the way of, makes you kind of have to come out a little bit. So now that I've got it broken, I'll take them both out and I'll hang the caliper. I've got some torn apart coat hanger now. Just take a screwdriver of some kind, make sure you don't get anything hydraulic, and just pull on that on the drum, or I'm sorry, on the disc, and you can work your caliper here off it and hang it off the strut that's up here. That'll be the next strut you see. Of course, pulling the brake caliper reveals that this inside one is quite worn out, so unfortunately for our owner here, they're going to need to do a brake job here pretty soon. Next we've got this rotor, which is well, they're pretty good, but some light loving with a hammer, probably rubber mallet would be better. We'll wiggle this puppy off here. You can also use these air vents with a shaft and kind of wiggle it off. I'll be honest, I never encountered one of these before. Looks to be, it's a T30 star bit, Torx I guess. Actually holds the disc on the bearing, and I looked at my new bearing and there is a hole for it, and I checked on this one and there's only the one, but apparently it holds, or at least is like a key, probably during assembly, to hold it on. Usually they're held on with the lug nuts and the wheel on stuff, but not this one. So another something we're going to have to anti-seize taken out here. That might free it up a little bit. We're still going to have to use a hammer, I think, but look out for this guy. Probably would have sheared him off if I hadn't taken another look. That one's empty. That one's empty. This one as a nut. Kind of shooting a process. I'm not actually showing you. I'm not tripoding it very well, but breaker bar, 10 millimeter. I got a deep socket and smooth torque, and out she slides. These have soap, but that's not our last battle, because as soon as you get the bolts out, the big deal will be trying to get the bearing from here to off of this piece here. It is a press fit and it does corrode a little bit. The axle won't be too tough, mostly because the bearing will be free, and then we're going to use a press to pop out the drive axle for the old bearing. So that won't be too tough. But now I got to get around. It's tight up top here, so I might have to use an extension to get it out a little bit. But just some smooth torque and you should be okay. Mind you, these have been soaking for 2 days with the penetrant oil, so that helps everything right along. Well, that was killer. This bolt came out great. This top bolt came out fine. This one was such a drag, and it broke free and went good for a little bit, and then it fought me the whole way out. I don't mind people who use Loctite on bolts. That's fine. It's their prerogative. I never do. In fact, I actually use anti-seize / thread lubricant, because the next guy who's got to get in here, he's already fighting corrosion, you know. So if you torque them in tight, they're good. You don't need to give it that further extra clamp, but that's just my preference. Your mileage may vary. Here's a gear puller, essentially, and it is, when I undid the bolts, the bearing came off. I've had to fight and fight and fight to get the bearings off before, but in this case, this one just came right off. And the next thing I've noticed is, as I'm putting the shaft in, the shaft's not even fighting. It's popping right out too. So I've got the ABS sensor disconnected, and as soon as I pull this off the drive shaft, kerplunk, it should fall right off. Okay, so it's off. I've cleaned the mating surface and all around inside here. And I always have to do the, here's the new one, here's the old one shot. Here's the new one, here's the old one. A little bit of play in it, as expected. But that's it for today. Wait for part 2, which will be tomorrow, on how to put in a new bearing on a 2008 Chevy Uplander. Take that, suckers. I don't mean to call you guys suckers. I know you're loyal subscribers and stuff, right, Willow? Yeah, but we're just breaking it up in 2. Get some mileage out of this thing.